I was exhausted. It was already 9 p.m., and the small town of Clarkton, Texas was quieting down for the night. I could finally head home after a grueling day at the clinic. As I sat at my desk, scribbling the last notes for the day, my phone rang sharply, cutting through the silence. "Dr. Linda White's," I answered, my voice heavy with fatigue. "Doctor, please, you have to come quickly." A frantic voice crackled through the line. "It's my mother. She's having severe headaches. She's in so much pain." I sighed. Another late-night emergency, just when I thought I could rest. But a doctor's duty never sleeps. "All right," I replied. "Give me the address." It was a nearby village just outside Clarkton, not too far. I grabbed my bag, and as I stepped into the hallway, I saw Sam Wilson, my assistant medical trainee, closing up his station. "Sam, you're coming with me," I said. He nodded without a word, clearly as tired as I was. We drove through the narrow, winding roads of the countryside, the only light coming from our car's headlights cutting through the pitch-black night. The village was eerily silent, and a thick fog had begun to creep in, curling around the trees like ghostly fingers. We reached the small house, its wooden frame barely holding up against the cold wind. As we stepped inside, I was hit by an intense feeling of dread. Air was thick, oppressive. A middle-aged woman lay on a narrow bed, her face contorted in pain. "Thank you for coming," a young man said, his eyes wide with worry. "She's been like this all day. No one else could help." I nodded and moved quickly to examine her. Her pulse was erratic, her forehead damp with sweat. I administered a sedative to ease her pain and began checking her vitals. Sam stood beside me, holding the flashlight steady. "There, she should rest now," I said after a while, watching her breathing slow and her face relaxed. I felt a small wave of relief wash over me, thinking I had done all I could. I turned to Sam. "Let's get back. Been a long day." Just as I was about to step away from the bed, I noticed a slight movement. The woman's body twitched, her eyes fluttering open. But it wasn't her eyes that greeted me. It was something else, something dark and cold. Her mouth twisted into a grotesque smile, and a deep, gravelly voice echoed from her throat, not her own. "You cannot leave, doctor. I need you." A chill ran down my spine. I stumbled back, almost tripping over my own feet. Sam's face turned pale, and he grabbed my arm. "We need to get out of here now." We turned and bolted for the door, but as soon as I reached for the handle, the room around us seemed to warp and twist. Walls stretched and bent, as if the house itself were alive, breathing. I looked back at the woman on the bed. She was gone. The bed was empty, sheets neatly made, as if no one had ever been there. "What's happening?" Sam shouted, panic rising in his voice. The room was now completely unrecognizable. A narrow, dark corridor stretched out before us, dimly lit by a flickering bulb that seemed to swing from an unseen breeze. "Stay close to me," I whispered, my voice trembling. "We have to find a way out." We moved slowly down the hallway, the air growing colder with each step. The walls seemed to close in around us, and a soft whispering filled the air. 1,000 voices speaking in hushed, sinister tones. Felt something brush against my arm, a soft, cold touch that sent a jolt of fear through my body. Suddenly, Sam stopped dead in his tracks. I turned to him, and my heart dropped. His eyes were wide, unseeing, his face slack as if in a trance. "Sam?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper. He turned to me slowly, his head tilting at an unnatural angle, his mouth curling into the same horrifying smile the woman had. And then in that same deep, otherworldly voice, he said, "You cannot leave, doctor. I need you." I screamed, stumbling back. Sam lunged at me, his hands reaching out. I ducked and ran, not knowing where I was going, just needing to get away. The hallway seemed endless, twisting and turning in impossible ways. I could hear Sam's footsteps behind me, heavy and relentless. I turned a corner and found myself in a small room, the door slamming shut behind me. I was trapped. I pressed my back against the wall, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the whispers growing louder, filling my head, drowning out my thoughts. Then I saw it, a small window, barely big enough. I rushed to it, prying it open with all my strength. The cold night air hit me like a wave, and I climbed through, falling onto the wet grass outside. I didn't stop. I ran to the car, fumbled with the keys, and finally managed to start the engine. I drove away as fast as I could, not daring to look back. When I finally reached my home, I collapsed onto the floor, my body shaking with fear and exhaustion. I locked every door and window, pulling the curtains tight. My hands wouldn't stop trembling as I dialed the police. All I got was static, a sharp, grating noise that made my head throb. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Sam, the woman, their eyes hollow and dark, their mouths twisted into that hideous smile. The next morning, I forced myself to go to the clinic, though my body ached with exhaustion and my mind was clouded with fear. I tried to contact the police again, but still, just static. My coworkers noticed my pale, haggard appearance, asking if I was okay. I just nodded, unable to speak of what I had seen. As the day wore on, I felt the weight of fatigue pressing down on me, my limbs heavy, my eyes drooping. I decided to leave early, thinking some rest might help. Clinic was quiet, most of the staff already gone. Only Mike, the night watchman, remained standing by the door. "Mike, could you lock up my office?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. He nodded, took the keys. As I turned towards the main exit, I heard it, a loud slam, the sound of the exit door shutting with a force that rattled the windows. I spun around and the lights began to flicker, casting long, twisted shadows on the walls. And then I heard it, that same voice, deep and echoing, coming from right behind me. "You cannot leave, doctor. I need you." I froze, my blood running cold. Slowly, I turned around. There stood Mike, his face a mask of that same unnatural grin, his eyes dark and empty. I screamed and ran towards the door, my hands clawing at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The lights flickered faster, casting the room in a strobe-like nightmare. I felt a hand on my shoulder, cold and firm. I turned, swinging wildly, and my vision blurred as darkness took over. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, surrounded by my colleagues. Their concerned faces blurred in and out of focus as they asked me what had happened. My throat was dry, my voice weak as I tried to explain. But then I saw her, the woman from the village, standing at the back of the room, her eyes glowing, cruel smile on her lips. She wore a doctor's coat, her finger pressed to her lips in a shushing gesture. I gasped, my voice catching in my throat. "Doctor?" One of my colleagues asked, stepping closer. I tried to warn them, tried to speak. The words wouldn't come. My vision blurred again, the room spinning. I felt myself slipping back into unconsciousness. Before everything went black, I heard them, all of them, speaking in unison, their voices deep and hollow. "You cannot leave, Linda. We need you." And then there was only darkness.